It feels like every single day I'm invited to another Dynasty startup draft, or I see one of my friends in the industry tweeting about or posting on Discord about their new Dynasty startup. So, safe to say it's startup season. And I thought it would be a good idea to go over some of the basic principles that I use when I'm in a startup draft, go over some mistakes to avoid, and actually break down my most recent startup draft that I just finished a couple of weeks ago. Dynasty startup drafts can be intimidating. You can set yourself up for years, or you can be lighting your next 2 years of entry fees on fire before any games are even played. They're also very hard to simulate because sleeper mocks against the CPU don't really work. The ADP is so wacky, it's really not going to look like anything that you see in a real draft. It's hard to get enough people together to do an actual startup mock draft because they are very time consuming. And even when you can get into one, you can't trade. So you can't see what it's like to move up and down the draft board, which I think is a pretty big part of a successful draft. So overall, it's just difficult. And you kind of have to just jump in and figure things out as you go. But the first thing you really need to internalize is that every startup draft is different. The sooner you accept this, the less frustrating you will find the entire draft experience. You should be willing to draft any kind of team. So if you're going into a startup with a particular strategy in mind, like if somebody tells you, oh, you've got to go wide receivers early, or you have to get a running back in this round, you are going to become frustrated when that doesn't work because every draft room is different. You're dealing with 11 other individual people. They're all going to have their own personal biases, their own personal processes. So, what you need to do is you need to be flexible. You need to be willing to take what your league mates give you. And often the best strategy is just not having a strategy.
Do I really look like a guy with a plan?
But even if you're willing to be flexible, even if you're going to adapt to what the draft room gives you, you should still be prepared. And the number one way to do that is to be familiar with the ADP and not to memorize the ADP, but to just pull it up. The best source for this is absolutely dynastydatalab.com. Go on there, pull up the ADP, and keep that with you as you go through the draft. On Dynasty Data Lab, you can customize the ADP that you're looking at to fit your league. So you can actually pick what time frame you want. Like I like to look at the last month worth of drafts to get an idea of where the market is right now. But you can also look at different types of drafts, right? Do you want rookies included? Right now, most startups include rookies. How many teams are in your league? How many points for passing touchdowns? Is there a tight end premium? You can customize a lot of this stuff. It might reduce the total sample number of drafts, but you can get pretty specific with the results you're seeing. And obviously, that's going to help you get a better feel for how your exact league might play out. You can even take your sleeper draft board ID and you can copy and paste that into Dynasty Data Lab, and it'll show your draft as it's unfolding, and the players will disappear as they've been picked. So familiarizing yourself with ADP is great because you can be aware of positional hotspots and know where you're likely to get certain positions at certain spots in the draft. But you don't want to fall into the trap of just trying to fill out your lineup of looking, okay, I need 3 wide receivers and 2 running backs and 2 quarterbacks. You don't want to go down that like a checklist and just take those players. You should be prioritizing value over just filling out your lineup. A startup draft is kind of like Monopoly. When you play Monopoly, the best strategy is to just buy every property that you land on. You're trying to acquire as much capital as possible and by extension, keep it away from your opponents. It would be stupid to decide you're only going to buy the blue properties or the green properties because those are the ones you really want to build your hotels on, because you're just going to be allowing your opponents to stack up all these other properties that they can use against you. In a startup draft, you should be taking value when it falls to you, even if that means being weak at one position. If every time you're on the clock, there's just no running back that you can select without massively reaching, don't draft any running backs. Really, your job in the startup, it's not to build the lineup you're going to play in week 1. Especially right now. I mean, it's June. You have months ahead of you to figure that out. Your job is to acquire capital. It's to build a valuable team. And so by extension, you should also be willing to trade down and pick up future picks, like rookie picks in 2025 and 2026. Quarterback is possibly the one exception to this because in super flex leagues, it can be pretty hard to trade away and trade for quarterbacks once the startup is over. Typically, the elite quarterbacks are the cheapest they're ever going to be in the startup. Jacob Sanderson has pointed out what I think is a pretty good reason for this, which is that in an established league outside of a startup draft, most teams have the number of quarterbacks they want to have at a given time. Most teams are going to have the 2 or 3 quarterbacks they want. They're not really eager to lower the total number of quarterbacks on their team or acquire an extra one that they don't need. So to get deals done, you usually have to involve a quarterback on both sides. And it's not common that you're able to pry one away from a manager without doing that. Because of this, I almost always draft a quarterback in the first 2 rounds of a dynasty startup. I like getting that elite quarterback that can kind of hold down the position where I know that I have a Kyler Murray or a Justin Herbert or a Lamar Jackson. Somebody that's going to start for multiple years is going to project to score a lot of points. And I don't have to worry about at least one of those spots. And then I can figure out from there where are the best values later on to fill those other quarterback spots that I might need. And some people go overboard in the other direction where they just start hoarding quarterbacks. They'll take 2 to start in the first 2 rounds, and then they'll just start snapping them up. 5th round quarterback, 6th round quarterback. I don't think this is a good strategy either. If you're getting these great values or what you see as great values on quarterbacks, you have to stop and think why that is for a second. It might be possible that your league mates just don't value quarterback as much as you do. And maybe they're wrong in doing that, but they're still the only people that you're able to trade with in the league. So if you're picking up all these guys, assuming you can just trade them later for better players, you might want to rethink that. It's possible that their minds are going to change when the season comes, but you really can't bank on that. What I would be trying to do is just build the ideal quarterback room for your team. You could almost assume that you're not allowed to trade a quarterback away or trade for a quarterback before the start of the season. And if you're happy with your quarterback room in that hypothetical scenario, you've probably done a good job. Now, I want to specifically address productive struggle because it's easily the most trendy startup strategy. And until this offseason, I was a pretty big proponent of it. Basically, in a productive struggle, you're just punting year one entirely in the interest of gathering value. You're getting these young players and picks so that you have a surplus of value. And then heading into year two and the years beyond, you have a really strong team. Now, I did a whole video on your chances of winning a dynasty league in a given season and why I think tanking is an emergency measure only. I'm going to leave a link to that in the description. You should check it out if you haven't seen it. But basically, there is a hard cap on the amount that you can increase your odds to win in a given season. And so it's usually just better to have more competitive years than to sacrifice one of those years to be stronger in the rest of the years. So for this reason, I would definitely not be going into a startup with the goal of doing a productive struggle, with the goal of losing in year one. I say when you go into your startup, just try to win the league, especially because this strategy has become so popular that there's a good chance there are 2, 3, even 4 managers that are going to take themselves out of contention immediately. And that's just going to make it even easier to win the league in year one. So that's what I've been trying to do. I'm just trying to go for it right away. That doesn't mean I'm drafting Christian McCaffrey and Travis Kelce and Devontae Adams and all my startups. You can still draft young players. You can still trade for rookie picks, but you're not deliberately trying to position yourself to not compete. Now, most of the other managers in your startup are prioritizing veteran production, and you think that the best values on the board are rookies or trading back for rookie picks. By all means, do that. I'm not telling you not to do that. You still want to play the values, even if that means building a team that on paper is not a strong contender. But that doesn't mean that you're out of the mix. You still have months that you can take that surplus value you've acquired by being a smart drafter and then using that in trades. You can build a contender on a budget and you can still have a lot of extra value. You can give yourself at least a chance at the playoffs in year one. And you're still set up well for the future. The overarching point of this is that you want to be flexible. You want to be responding to what other managers are doing. You want to zig when they zag. Now I'd like to talk about my most recent startup draft, just to give you an idea about how some of these principles are going to play out in a real draft scenario. This was a BDGE Dynasty startup that I joined through their Discord. So shout out to them. I'll put a link in the description. And this is pretty standard league, 12 teams, half PPR, tight end premium, 10 starters. I'll also post a link to the full draft board in the description in case you want to check that out, but I'll try to put some of it up on the screen here so you can see as I go. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to quickly walk through my first 12 picks or so and talk you through, how did I make decisions when I was on the clock? How did I make trades to get into the spots that I wanted to be in? And how did I adapt to what my league mates were doing? As you can see, my picks are spread out pretty far all over the board. I was one of the more active traders. And I think some of the trades that I made were really vital in setting up the team that I have, which I think is pretty good. The first round was pretty standard, although I don't know what we were doing, letting Patrick Mahomes fall to pick 5. I wasn't there. I was at the other end of the board. So nothing I could do about that, really. Now, where I was sitting at pick 11, I'd probably take Justin Herbert there in a vacuum, but I've seen Justin Herbert falling, and I thought that maybe he'd come back to me on the other side. So I went with Jamar Chase here instead, who I think has a pretty good case for Dynasty wide receiver 1. If not, he's Dynasty wide receiver 2. He's in that same tier with Justin Jefferson. He's one of the few non-quarterbacks that you can really build a team around. But Justin Herbert didn't fall to me, so when I was back up at 202, Kyler Murray was actually my best player available. That's who I would take there if I was forced to sit. But again, looking at ADP, I knew that that wasn't really where he was going. I didn't think that anyone in the league was going to take him there. So I looked for different trade options. In the end, I was able to move back one spot and I actually was able to move my 5th round pick up a little bit, and I was able to turn a 4th into a 3rd in 2025. And that might seem like a pretty insignificant trade, but I'm getting something for nothing essentially. I'm almost certain that Kyler's going to be there with the next pick. I was pretty sure that the manager was trading up for Amon-Ra St. Brown, and he was. And moving up that 5th round pick into the late 4th turned out to be a pretty big deal for me later on.
That's a surprise tool that can help us later.
Now, I was perfectly prepared to take Kyler Murray at 203, but I do have a ton of him in Dynasty, and I thought I would at least see if I could get a good deal to move back again. I ended up making a pretty big move down that I don't normally do because it boxes me out of that quarterback in the first 2 rounds. But the value here was just too good for me to pass up. I was able to move back from the 203 to the 309 and pick up an extra 1st round pick in 2025 and 2 future 2nd round picks. That pick I got at 309 turned out to be Dak Prescott. I may have gotten a little bit lucky there, but that is basically where Dak's ADP is. So essentially I traded Kyler for Dak, a 1st and 2 seconds, which is something I would do every day of the week. But it was 3rd round reversal. So I did have a pick in between those picks. At 302, I went with Garrett Wilson. I thought I was going to be taking Malik Neighbors there, but Garrett Wilson falls to me. That's fine. I see him as more of a mid to late 2nd round value. So I didn't really have to think about that pick at all. Now, in my opinion, what I was able to do in the 4th round really makes this draft. I picked up Jalen Waddle and Drake May at the 409 and the 410. Neither of these guys should be available in the 4th round at all, let alone the late 4th. Once I saw that both were available at 409, I actually moved a future 3rd round pick just to move up a couple of spots and make sure I could get both guys. But that's the benefit of being patient. That's the benefit of moving back, is that you actually can benefit when your league mates make mistakes in front of you. You get to catch that falling value, which I was obviously very fortunate to pick up here. Now, because of the trades that I had made, I wasn't supposed to pick again for quite a while, and I was fine to just sit and wait because I was thrilled with my first 5 picks. Getting Chase, Garrett Wilson, Waddle, Dak Prescott, and Drake May through 5 picks, I was on top of the world. But the player at 512 started shopping his pick around, and I wanted to see, could I get in there? I had a couple of guys I was interested in, mostly Brock Bowers and Kyle Pitts. I had an extra 1st round pick to play with. I think Pitts is worth a little bit more than a 1st. And plus, it was my own pick, and I was already feeling good about that not being early, not to say that it's guaranteed to be, 10th, 11th, 12th, but I'm confident that that's not an early 1st round pick. So I sent that away basically straight up for the 512. And I took Kyle Pitts there. So now I've secured my elite tight end, hopefully. And then on the other end of the board, I'm able to grab a couple of Chiefs that I think are just underpriced right now in Rashee Rice and Isaiah Pacheco. So I didn't panic. I didn't force a running back pick early, but I'm still able to get a running back in round 7 that's a locked-in starter on a great offense. I think he could easily be an RB1. I think he projects pretty similarly to guys like Travis Etienne and Josh Jacobs, who went rounds earlier. So I'm feeling great about Pacheco as my RB1 there. And then in the next couple of rounds, I get a couple more values. Specifically, Bo Nix at 811 is just ridiculous. There's no reason he should be going a round and a half after Will Levis and Bryce Young. This is the 12th overall pick. He's going to be a starter for multiple seasons. So he has value upside. He has job security. And he actually has a little bit of mobility too. I think sometimes people just get a little bit too cute with player takes, and clearly the people in this lobby just didn't believe in Bo Nix. But again, I'm happy to just clean up on those ADP values. So I took Nix as my QB3. I figured I was good at that position for a long while. And then I'm able to add Deontay Johnson, Christian Watson, and Brian Robinson are all guys that I think are great values at those costs. And then in round 12, I get Tyjae Spears. So, I'm filling out a little bit of a running back room. It's obviously not going to be the strongest running back room in the league, but I have starters in Pacheco and Robinson. I have Spears, who's an interesting young player. So I've got something there. It's enough, at least for now. I can always make trades later. I've got a killer wide receiver room. I've got an elite tight end. I have a really great quarterback room considering the prices that I got on those 3 quarterbacks. And I also have future rookie picks. So I think through 12 rounds, that's about as good as I could have expected. But none of that was planned. I didn't know these people I was playing with. I didn't have a strategy in mind that I wanted to do. I just tried to adapt to what everyone else was doing and take the best values on the board when I was on the clock. So I feel great about this team. I do not think it's the best roster in the league from a purely redraft perspective. Like if the season was starting tomorrow, I would not pick myself to lead this league in points scored or lead in regular season wins. But I do believe that this is easily a playoff caliber starting lineup as it sits right now, without even having the benefit of any trades I make in the next 2 months. And according to dynastydaddy.com, I am #1 in trade value in this league. So in the coming months, I will aim to consolidate some of that value into pieces that upgrade my starting lineup, put me in position to contend for a bye week while still having a very valuable roster moving forward. All right, if you made it all the way to the end, hopefully you feel more confident in your ability to navigate a dynasty startup. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and check out the video in the description. It's all about contending, rebuilding, and your actual chances of winning a dynasty championship. Feel free to leave any startup related questions in the comments. Just make sure to put your specific league settings in there so I can give you the best possible advice. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.